Elena Porter had always lived her life in the careful shadows of others' expectations. Raised in a bustling city where every corner hummed with the noise of ambition, she had never quite felt at home. Her parents, well-meaning but overbearing, had meticulously mapped out her path. A prestigious university, an office job, a predictable romance with someone of equal status. But Elena's heart had never conformed to maps or schedules. It longed for space, for the open sky, for the kind of life that didn't come with deadlines or subtle criticisms disguised as advice. When she received a job offer at a small library in the foothills of New Mexico, she hesitated only briefly. The idea of quiet streets, endless horizons, and the possibility of a life unburdened by the weight of expectation was irresistible. She packed her things with a mixture of nervous excitement and bittersweet farewell, leaving behind a city that had always felt too loud, too crowded, and too rigid. The first sight of her new town, Arroyo Verde, took her breath away. Nestled among rolling mesas and canyons carved with time, the town exuded a quiet charm that seemed untouched by the rush of the outside world. Adobe buildings glimmered in the sun, and the scent of sagebrush mingled with the distant aroma of freshly baked bread from the local bakery. Here, she realized, she could breathe. Elena moved into a small, cozy apartment above the town's bookstore, its wooden floors creaking in welcome, as if the building itself approved of her presence. The landlord, a kindly retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Thompson, welcomed her with a plate of homemade cookies and a map of the town's best hidden spots. Elena, who had always been shy and cautious with new people, found herself smiling genuinely for the first time in years. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. Despite the picturesque surroundings, Elena carried with her the quiet nervousness of inexperience. She had never been in a serious romantic relationship and often found herself self-conscious about her naivety. She would blush at compliments, stumble over casual conversations, and retreat inward when others discussed matters of love and intimacy. Yet she did not see this as a weakness, merely a part of who she was. And in this small town, far from the judgmental eyes of the city, she felt a chance to explore herself on her own terms. Her days quickly settled into a gentle rhythm. Mornings were spent tending to the library's dusty shelves, arranging books and cataloging new arrivals. She found satisfaction in the quiet routine, the rustle of pages, and the occasional soft laughter of children visiting for story time. Afternoons were often spent walking through the desert trails, sketching the landscape in her journal, or sipping coffee at a sunlit cafe while watching the town's residents go about their lives. The simplicity of it all was soothing, a balm to her overstimulated mind. Evenings brought solitude but not loneliness. Elena would sit by her small window, watching the sunset paint the mesas in shades of amber and crimson. She felt a strange, gentle thrill at the thought of being entirely responsible for her own happiness. Here, in this quiet corner of the world, she could finally be herself, untouched by the pressures of her past, open to whatever life might offer. And yet, beneath the calm, there was a flicker of anticipation, a sense, unspoken and unformed, that her life was about to change in ways she could not yet imagine. Elena didn't know it yet, but her world was on the verge of intersecting with someone whose presence would challenge her shyness, awaken emotions she had never allowed herself to feel, and ultimately lead her toward a love she had only dared to dream about. She was, in every sense, ready to begin, not just a new chapter in her life, but a journey toward discovering the depths of her own heart. High atop the rugged cliffs overlooking Arroyo Verde lived Cale Yazzie, a man whose presence in the town was both revered and quietly feared. To outsiders, he was the wealthy Apache landowner whose family had deep roots in the region, known for generosity to the community, but also a fierce independence that discouraged intrusion. To those who knew him personally, he was a man of rare depth, honest, observant, and unshakably loyal. Yet despite his wealth and status, Cale had built walls around himself, not from arrogance, but from the careful protection of a heart that had already known loss. Cale's home, a sprawling adobe estate blending traditional Apache architecture with modern touches, mirrored his personality, strong, grounded, yet unexpectedly warm. Every corner was deliberate, wooden beams polished smooth, artwork honoring his heritage lining the walls, and open spaces that allowed the wind to sweep freely through the rooms. He spent much of his time managing his land, ensuring the community had what it needed, and tending to the natural environment that had been his family's legacy for generations. Despite his structured life, Cale was drawn to moments of quiet observation. He often wandered the outskirts of town in the early morning, walking the trails and watching Arroyo Verde slowly wake. He noticed everything: the patterns of the wind through the juniper trees, the way the sun caught the adobe walls at different hours, and the rhythm of townspeople moving about their daily lives. Cale had always been perceptive, a skill that had served him well in business and in understanding people. Yet he rarely allowed himself to engage with the world on a personal level, preferring to maintain a safe distance. That distance, however, was about to be challenged. One morning, as Cale walked the familiar ridge that overlooked the town, his eyes caught a new figure moving along the desert path below. She was small, tentative, yet there was a quiet determination in her steps. Her hair, dark and untamed, caught the sunlight, and there was an innocence in the way she observed the landscape. Pausing to sketch in a small journal she carried, for reasons he couldn't immediately explain, Cale felt a pull toward her presence. There was something raw and genuine about her that drew his attention, something he rarely encountered in people who walked through his town. He watched silently, intrigued by the way she seemed unaware of the world around her yet fully present in it. Her shyness, her curiosity, and the subtle strength in the way she carried herself struck him deeply. Kyle's curiosity was not idle. Over the following days, he found himself noticing her more. At the library and the market, even glimpsed from the cliffs above. He recognized in her a rare combination of vulnerability and resilience, a heart that had not yet been hardened by life's disappointments. Unlike many others he had observed, she seemed untouched by pretense, untouched by the expectations of others. Yet Kyle was cautious. His life had taught him that appearances could deceive, that emotions could entangle and wound if handled recklessly. He decided to watch from a distance to understand her better before revealing his presence. In her he sensed a spark, a quiet light that demanded protection but also deserved freedom. And though he did not yet know her name, he felt an unspoken promise forming in the depths of his mind, a promise that, should fate allow, he would ensure her safety, her happiness, and perhaps in time her heart. Cale Yazzie, the man of wealth, strength, and careful restraint, had just discovered something unexpected, a profound curiosity and perhaps even a budding hope, for a life intertwined with someone completely unlike himself, someone who might challenge the walls he had so carefully built. Elena had always enjoyed the mornings when the town was still half asleep, the sun casting long amber streaks across the adobe rooftops. That morning, with her journal tucked under her arm, she had decided to explore a new trail that led from the edge of town into the nearby canyons. She liked the solitude, the way the wind whispered through the sagebrush and the distant crows called to each other across the ridges. It was her time to breathe, to be entirely herself without expectation or judgment. Cale, as was his habit, had been surveying his land from a ridge not far from the trail Elena had chosen. The early light played across the mesas, illuminating the curves and crevices of the desert in shades of gold and rust. When he spotted her figure below, moving slowly and deliberately along the path, a flicker of curiosity sparked in him. She paused frequently, sketching the landscape in a small leather-bound journal. There was a focus in her posture, a quiet intensity in the way she studied the desert that caught his attention. For Cale, it was unusual to feel this kind of pull toward someone he had never spoken to. Most people he encountered in Arroyo Verde were practical, busy, or indifferent. Elena's presence, however, seemed to demand acknowledgement. He descended the ridge quietly, curious but careful not to startle her. Elena, meanwhile, had wandered farther along the trail than she had intended. Lost in her sketches, she hadn't noticed the small footpath leading to a stream where the water ran clearer and cooler than anywhere else she had seen. Kneeling by the edge, she dipped her fingers into the water, marveling at its unexpected clarity. The solitude felt perfect until she became aware of a shadow moving along the path behind her. "Hello," a deep, calm voice said, startling her. She turned quickly, her eyes widening. Standing there was a man whose presence seemed to command the canyon itself. Tall, strong, with dark eyes that reflected both curiosity and something gentler, he regarded her silently for a moment. I didn't mean to intrude," Elena stammered, clutching her journal to her chest. "You're not intruding," Cale replied smoothly, his voice steady. "These trails are open to anyone, though I admit few wander this far. You're new to the area, aren't you?" Elena nodded, finding herself unexpectedly disarmed by his calm demeanor. There was no judgment in his tone, only interest. "Yes, I just moved here recently. I work at the library in town." Cale's gaze softened slightly. "I see, I'm Cale Yazzie. I live nearby. I oversee some of this land." His words were simple, but the weight behind them carried the authority of someone accustomed to responsibility and respect. "I'm Elena," she said, her voice steadier now, though a blush crept up her cheeks. There was something about him, his quiet confidence, the careful way he observed her, that made her heart beat faster. She felt simultaneously cautious and curious, aware of her own shyness but drawn to the strength in his presence. For a long moment they simply observed each other, the canyon around them filled with the soft rustle of wind and the occasional call of a bird. Neither seemed eager to break the silence, yet both felt its significance. In that quiet exchange, a subtle understanding passed between them, a recognition of something rare and unspoken, a spark that hinted at connection. Kyle was the first to break the silence. "This water is good," he said, gesturing to the stream. "Many people don't notice it, but it's reliable. You'll find the land has many little treasures if you look closely." Elena smiled, a flicker of warmth in her eyes. "I think I already have." Her words carried a double meaning. She meant the stream, but the acknowledgement lingered longer, unspoken, between them. As she continued her sketching, Kyle lingered nearby, observing her with an intensity that was neither intrusive nor threatening. Their first encounter was brief, yet it left an impression neither would soon forget. It was the beginning of a story neither had expected, a collision of worlds, personalities, and hearts that promised the possibility of something profound. In the days following their first encounter, Cale found himself thinking about Elena more often than he cared to admit. He would rise before dawn, surveying the hills and trails that surrounded Arroyo Verde, and more often than not his eyes sought her familiar figure. It was not a matter of obsession, he told himself, it was curiosity, a fascination with someone who seemed simultaneously fragile and quietly strong, someone who carried herself with a sincerity he rarely encountered. Elena, on the other hand, remained blissfully unaware of the depth of his attention. Her life had fallen into a comfortable rhythm, punctuated by the library's daily tasks, her walks along the trails, and the sketching that had become both hobby and sanctuary. She noticed the occasional silhouette in the distance, the way the sun sometimes cast long shadows along the cliffs, but she attributed these fleeting glimpses to wandering hikers or local ranchers. Cale, however, did not approach her directly at first. He wanted to understand her world before stepping into it. From a distance, he observed the subtle details that made her unique, the careful way she organized her journal, the tilt of her head when she studied the landscape, the soft, hesitant way she interacted with the townspeople. It was in these quiet, unguarded moments that he saw the truth of her character. She was genuine, thoughtful, untouched by pretense. He noticed how she paused to speak to children visiting the library, offering a gentle smile and encouragement. How she lingered at the market, observing the colors of the produce and the rhythm of life around her. How she sketched even the smallest details of her surroundings, capturing what others might overlook. To Cale, these actions revealed a depth of perception and a tenderness of heart that stirred something protective, almost instinctual within him. At night, he would sometimes find himself replaying small moments of their encounter, the nervous glance she had given when first seeing him, the cautious smile that tugged at the corners of her lips. He imagined her laughter, quiet and melodic as she explored the town or wandered along the trails. There was a patience in her, a slow unfolding, and Cale understood instinctively that she was not someone to be rushed. Elena, meanwhile, began to feel a subtle sense of being watched, though she could not quite place it. Sometimes, from the corner of her eye, she glimpsed movement along the cliffs or noticed the occasional figure lingering near her favorite sketching spots. There was no threat, no sense of danger, only an inexplicable awareness that someone cared deeply about the same world she cherished. It made her heart race, though she couldn't explain why. This delicate dance, him watching, her sensing, both unaware of the growing bond, laid the foundation for something neither had fully anticipated. Kyle was learning her rhythms, her hesitations, her joys, all without a single word exchanged. Elena, unknowingly, was opening herself to the presence of someone who could see her fully, appreciate her quietly, and perhaps, in time, enter her life in ways she had never imagined. For Kyle, these observations were more than idle curiosity. They were the careful study of someone he might one day choose to protect, cherish, and love. He had encountered many people in his life, but Elena stirred something rare, a quiet longing not just to possess, but to understand. And so, from the ridges, from the shadows of the desert, Kale watched. Not as a trespasser, not as a predator, but as a man beginning to recognize that the world had placed before him a rare, luminous heart, one that he might one day hope to call his own. Over the next few weeks, Arroyo Verde became the backdrop for Elena and Kale's gradual, unspoken connection. Their paths began to cross more frequently, though always seemingly by chance. Kale would appear at the library just as she was shelving a stack of books, offering a nod or a brief, courteous smile. Elena, increasingly aware of his presence, felt a mix of curiosity and nervous anticipation each time she caught sight of him. Their first intentional conversation came on a warm afternoon at the local cafe. Elena had chosen a quiet table near the sunlit window, her journal open as she sketched the bustling streets outside. Kale entered, ordering his usual coffee, and noticed her immediately. Rather than sitting across from her, a bold move he was not yet ready for, he lingered nearby, pretending to read the menu while his eyes discreetly studied her. "Mind if I join you?" he asked finally, his voice calm but carrying a quiet confidence that made Elena startle slightly. Sure," she said, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. Her pulse quickened, but she felt an odd sense of comfort in his presence, as if he had stepped out of the shadows of her imagination into reality. They spoke at first about trivial things, the cafe, the weather, the best local trails, but each conversation carried undercurrents of something deeper. Kale was patient, allowing Elena to express herself fully, asking thoughtful questions without prying. Elena, in turn, felt herself opening in ways she hadn't before, sharing small personal details about her life, her art, and her fascination with the desert landscape. Their shared moments weren't limited to the cafe. On weekends, they sometimes found themselves at the same trailheads, Elena sketching, Kyle walking nearby with a quiet attentiveness. Occasionally, he would point out a rare plant or an unusual rock formation, and she would marvel at the details she might have overlooked. Their interactions were light at first, a shared laugh at a funny observation, a brief exchange of advice, but with each meeting, the comfort between them grew. One afternoon, as Elena struggled to capture the shifting colors of the sunset in her journal, Kale approached. "You've got a good eye," he said quietly. "Most people miss the subtle changes in light this time of day." Elena looked up, a flush rising to her cheeks. Thank you. I try to notice what most people don't." "You notice things because you care," Kyle said, his voice softer now. "That's rare." For a moment, the world seemed to pause around them. Elena felt a flutter of something unfamiliar, recognition perhaps that someone could see her not just in passing, but in the way she truly was. Kale, in turn, felt a subtle shift in his heart, a growing awareness that the woman before him was not simply another visitor to his land, but someone who might leave an indelible mark on his life. Even the simplest moments began to hold significance. Walking together through the market, sharing stories over coffee, pausing to watch the desert sunset, they were accumulating memories, small but profound, that bound them closer without either fully realizing it. With every laugh, every thoughtful glance, every quiet acknowledgement, the distance between them shrank. By the end of the month, what had begun as casual, accidental meetings had evolved into a rhythm. They looked forward to these shared moments, savoring the way their worlds, so different yet so complementary, intertwined. Elena's guarded heart was beginning to trust, and Kale's careful restraint was softening in ways he had not expected. In the quiet magic of Arroyo Verde, amidst the sunlit trails and warm adobe streets, a bond was forming, one built on curiosity, respect, and the subtle thrill of discovery. Both sensed it, even if they did not yet name it. Something rare and powerful was beginning between them. As the days grew longer, and the desert sun warmed the mesas of Arroyo Verde. Elena and Cale's interactions began to shift. The laughter and casual conversations of their early encounters were now accompanied by moments of quiet honesty, where each felt safe to reveal more of themselves than they had to anyone else. It began on a late afternoon in the library. Elena was rearranging a stack of old books when Cale appeared, carrying a few volumes on local history. "I thought you might find these interesting," he said, his voice gentle but deliberate. As she accepted them, their hands brushed, and a subtle spark traveled between them, leaving Elena momentarily flustered. Cale's eyes, dark and perceptive, held hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "You have a good touch with these books," Cale remarked, nodding toward her careful arrangement. "It shows you care." Elena smiled softly, a blush warming her cheeks. "I do. I like to treat things with care, even if it's just a stack of old books." "That's rare," Cale said quietly, his voice almost reverent. Most people go through life without noticing the small, important details. It was the first time Elena felt that someone saw her, not just superficially, but truly. The weight of that acknowledgement settled over her in a gentle, thrilling way. She realized that in Cale's presence she could be herself completely, quiet, thoughtful, hesitant, and still entirely worthy of attention. Their emotional intimacy deepened in the weeks that followed. They began to share stories of their pasts, not as a forced confessional but in moments of trust that arose naturally. Elena spoke of the city she had left behind, of parents who loved her yet often overlooked her individuality, and of the quiet yearning she had always carried for a life less defined by obligation. Cale listened with unwavering attention, never interrupting, never judging, simply absorbing her words. In return, Cale opened the door to parts of himself he rarely revealed. He spoke of his family's history, the responsibility that came with his land, and the losses he had endured. Friends and relatives who had passed too soon, decisions made under pressure, and the solitude that had shaped his adult life. Elena listened, sensing the weight he carried, and instinctively offered the quiet empathy that came naturally to her. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mesas, painting the desert in gold and crimson, they found themselves walking along a quiet trail. The silence between them was not empty. It was filled with mutual understanding. Cale finally spoke, his voice low, carrying a rare vulnerability. "I've spent much of my life keeping others at a distance," he admitted. "It's safer that way. Until now." Elena glanced at him, her heart stirring. "Until now?" she asked softly. "Yes," he said, meeting her gaze. "I've watched, observed, learned, and I think maybe it's time I allowed someone in. Someone like you." Her breath caught. She had never expected such honesty, such a direct acknowledgement of his feelings. And yet hearing it from him stirred something inside her, a sense of being recognized, valued, and understood in ways she had never experienced. In that moment, a bridge formed between them. They did not need grand declarations or dramatic gestures. Their connection was rooted in subtle trust, shared vulnerability, and the quiet thrill of emotional intimacy. Each conversation, each glance, each thoughtful gesture strengthened the bond they were building, laying a foundation for the deeper love that was beginning to take root. By the time they returned to the edge of town, their hands brushed again, this time deliberately, and neither withdrew. The desert wind whispered around them as if acknowledging the quiet transformation unfolding between two hearts. Elena felt it. Kyle's presence was no longer distant or observational. It was deliberate, tender, and real. And Cale knew with a certainty that surprised him that he was beginning to care for her in a way that went far beyond curiosity or admiration. In the golden light of Arroyo Verde, amid the desert trails and sun-drenched streets, emotional intimacy had blossomed. It was subtle yet profound, a connection that neither could ignore, shaping the contours of a relationship that promised depth, trust, and ultimately love. No story of growing love is without its challenges, and for Elena and Cale, the first real obstacles appeared subtly, like ripples across the otherwise calm waters of Arroyo Verde. Their bond, delicate and promising, was about to be tested by misunderstanding, societal expectations, and the inner fears each carried. The first tension arose from Elena's past. One afternoon, a city colleague arrived unexpectedly at the library, dropping by with news of a potential promotion and a prestigious exhibition for her sketches. Elena felt torn. The opportunity was significant, perhaps life-changing, but it also threatened the routine and emotional stability she had begun to build in Arroyo Verde. She worried that Cale, whose life was deeply rooted in the desert and its traditions, would see her ambition as a sign that she might leave, that her heart could not truly belong to him. Meanwhile, Cale faced pressures of his own. His family expected him to maintain the land's legacy in ways that often conflicted with his personal desires. There were whispers among the town's older generation about who he should associate with, about maintaining proper alliances within the community. Though subtle, these expectations created tension in his mind. Cale had grown used to following his own path, but Elena's presence had brought a vulnerability he wasn't accustomed to. For the first time, he feared losing someone not because of his own actions, but because of the invisible weight of external judgment. Their first misunderstanding emerged during a shared outing to the local market. Elna had been distracted, contemplating the career opportunity from the city, when Cale's distant, reflective mood was misinterpreted. She thought he was upset with her for even considering leaving, while he assumed her distraction indicated disinterest in the bond they were forming. Neither spoke, each retreating into their private worries. By evening, a quiet tension hung between them, an invisible wall neither knew how to dismantle. The desert, usually a place of solace, reflected the turbulence of their emotions. Cale wandered the cliffs alone, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing against his desire for connection. Elena, meanwhile, sketched in silence by the stream, her art tinged with uncertainty and a newfound melancholy. Both were aware, subconsciously, that something had shifted, yet neither had the courage to confront it openly. External circumstances added further strain. A sudden land dispute threatened Cale's property, requiring urgent attention and demanding his focus. Elena, sensing his preoccupation, feared that she was becoming secondary to his obligations. Though Cale remained protective and thoughtful, the practical demands of life intruded on the emotional space they had begun to carve for each other. Despite the tension, the obstacles also revealed the depth of their feelings. In moments of reflection, Cale realized that his attraction to Elena went beyond curiosity or admiration. It was genuine care, bordering on a need to ensure her happiness. Elena, too, recognized that her heart leaned toward him, that her moments of doubt were fueled less by his actions than by fear of losing someone she had come to trust deeply. The conflict served as a crucible, testing their patience, communication, and willingness to be vulnerable. It forced both to confront fears they had long ignored. Elena's fear of being too inexperienced or transient to deserve lasting love, and Cale's fear of losing someone he could not bear to be without. By the end of this chapter in their story, the obstacles had not broken them, they had only highlighted the stakes. The love between them was real, fragile, yet resilient, and the challenges looming on the horizon demanded courage, honesty, and the willingness to risk everything for the chance of something extraordinary. In Arroyo Verde, amid its sunlit streets and shadowed cliffs, their bond was tested, but neither could ignore the pull of the connection they had begun to forge. The stage was set for a reckoning, where heart and circumstance would collide, pushing them toward choices that could define the course of both their lives. The turning point came on a late summer evening, when Arroyo Verde's usual calm was disrupted by a sudden desert storm. Rain fell in heavy sheets, lightning illuminating the cliffs and mesas in brilliant flashes. The normally quiet trails became treacherous, and the desert air, filled with the scent of wet sagebrush, carried an electric tension that mirrored the emotions simmering between Elena and Cale. Elena had been sketching near her favorite stream when the sky darkened abruptly. By the time she realized how quickly the storm had arrived, the path back to town was slick and nearly impassable. Panic briefly took hold as she struggled against the rising current of the small stream, slipping and almost falling into the rushing water. Her journal, clutched tightly to her chest, was soaked, but worse than the ruined sketches was the sense of vulnerability she had never felt so acutely. Cale, patrolling the outskirts of his land, had noticed the dark clouds and sensed trouble. When he spotted Elena struggling against the stream, his instincts overrode all hesitation. Without a second thought, he rushed toward her, his boots slipping slightly in the mud but his determination unwavering. "Elena," he called, his voice cutting through the sound of the storm. She looked up, relief and fear warring in her expression, and Cale reached her side just as she lost her footing. With a strong, steady hand, he pulled her to safety, guiding her to a nearby rock overhang that offered shelter from the downpour. His arms, solid and unyielding, wrapped around her in a protective embrace, grounding her trembling body. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low but urgent, his dark eyes searching hers. Yes," Elena stammered, though her heart was still racing. "Thank you." Cale didn't let go immediately, letting the shared silence speak volumes. For the first time, the distance between them, the careful observation, the restrained affection, was replaced by raw, undeniable emotion. The storm raged around them, but beneath the sheltering rock, time seemed to slow. "Elena," Cale said finally, his voice husky with feeling. "I've watched you. I've cared for you, more than I realized I could care for anyone, and I can't stay silent any longer. I don't want to wait. I don't want to pretend that I don't feel this." Elena's breath caught. She had sensed the pull between them for weeks, but hearing his words aloud, so candid and deliberate, brought her emotions rushing to the surface. Fear, longing, and relief collided, leaving her momentarily speechless. Kyle," she whispered, finally meeting his gaze. "I've felt it too. I didn't know if it was real or if it was just hope, but it is real." The storm around them seemed to echo their confession. Lightning illuminated the cliffs as if the desert itself bore witness to the moment. Kyle took her hand gently, holding it as if to anchor them both in the reality of what they were feeling. In that instant, they understood something profound. The walls they had each built, the doubts and fears that had kept them cautious, had been unnecessary. Their hearts had spoken louder than hesitation, and they had heard each other clearly. The turning point was not a dramatic, sweeping gesture, but a convergence of courage, honesty, and emotional vulnerability. In the storm's shadow, Elena and Cale confronted everything that had held them back: distance, fear, and the invisible pressures of their respective pasts. And in doing so, they found clarity, a mutual recognition that their bond was worth embracing fully, without reservation. By the time the rain softened and the first streaks of sunset broke through the clouds, Elena and Kyle stood together, hands intertwined, hearts aligned. The turning point had arrived, not through circumstance alone, but through the deliberate choice to be vulnerable, to trust, and to acknowledge the depth of their feelings. Arroyo Verde, with its mesas, trails, and quiet streets, had borne witness to the moment that would change both their lives forever. The weeks following the storm brought a quiet, joyful shift to Elena and Cale's relationship. What had once been cautious glances and subtle interactions became deliberate gestures, shared laughter, and the kind of comfort that only comes from truly understanding another person. But for Cale, admiration and affection had grown into something deeper, a certainty he could no longer keep to himself. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the mesas, painting the desert in shades of amber and rose, Cale led Elena to his family's favorite lookout point. The spot overlooked the town, the winding trails and the sweeping mesas beyond, a place where he had often gone alone to think and reflect. Tonight he wanted her there, not just as a companion, but as the person he was ready to honor and commit to fully. "Elena," he began, his voice steady but carrying the weight of his emotions. "These past weeks, getting to know you, watching you, sharing time with you, have changed my life. I've spent years keeping my heart guarded, but with you I realize there's nothing I want more than to be open, to be present, to share my life with you." Elena's chest tightened. She had felt the bond between them growing stronger, but hearing Cale speak so openly, so earnestly, brought a rush of emotions she could barely contain. Cale," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "I feel the same. I've never met anyone who sees me the way you do, who makes me feel safe, understood, and like I belong." Cale took her hands in his, holding them firmly but tenderly. "Elena, I don't want this to be temporary. I don't want to watch from the sidelines anymore. I choose you. I choose your heart, your mind, your soul. I choose to be with you, today, tomorrow, and for every day that comes after. Will you let me be that person for you?" Tears welled in Elena's eyes, and she laughed softly, a sound of relief, joy, and wonder. "Yes, Cale, yes, I choose you too. I want to be with you always." In that moment, the desert around them seemed to pause, the wind whispering through the sagebrush, the sun casting its final golden rays across the mesas, as if the world itself acknowledged the declaration of love taking place. Cale drew her close, their foreheads touching, and the intimacy of that embrace spoke volumes. No words were needed beyond the promises they had just made. Their declaration was more than a confession. It was a pledge, a recognition of the journey they had both taken, through curiosity, observation, shared moments, and emotional intimacy. It was a choice made deliberately and consciously, the kind of love that withstands challenges, embraces vulnerability, and celebrates the unique connection they had cultivated. From that day forward, their relationship was marked by a new confidence and joy. They walked hand in hand through Arroyo Verde, their laughter echoing in the streets and trails. Each glance, each touch, each shared moment became a reinforcement of their promise to one another. Cale's decision to openly declare his love, and Elena's willing acceptance, created a foundation stronger than either had imagined. It was no longer about observation or cautious curiosity. It was about two hearts fully aligned, committed to honoring, protecting, and cherishing one another forever. In the quiet majesty of the desert, amidst the rolling mesas and sunlit trails, their love was no longer tentative. It was declared, acknowledged, and chosen, a promise that would guide them through every challenge, every joy, and every day of the life they would build together. The months that followed Cale and Elena's declaration of love were filled with a quiet, steady joy. Arroyo Verde became more than a town. It was the canvas on which they painted their life together. Each day brought shared routines, laughter, and deepening trust. Their bond strengthened by the challenges they had already overcome and the promises they had made to each other. Elena continued her work at the library, but now her days were punctuated by moments with Cale, long walks through desert trails, sketches exchanged over coffee, and evenings spent beneath the stars on the cliffs overlooking the town. She reveled in the simplicity and authenticity of life in Arroyo Verde, and Cale marveled at her ability to find beauty in the smallest details, reminding him to slow down and appreciate the present. Cale, for his part, had grown in ways he hadn't expected. The walls he had built around his heart were no longer barriers but spaces that allowed Elena in. He shared the responsibilities of his land more openly, trusting her insight and valuing her perspective. The careful, watchful man who had observed from the cliffs had transformed into a partner, present, devoted and unafraid to express his love. Their love, grounded in emotional intimacy and mutual respect, had become a source of stability in a world that often demanded compromise. Even the town's residents, who had initially whispered about the unlikely pairing, began to recognize the authenticity of their bond. Elena and Cale had forged a relationship that was not about appearances or social expectation, but about understanding, support, and genuine connection. One evening, as the sun set behind the mesas, casting long shadows across the adobe rooftops, Kyle took Elena to the place where he had first confessed his love. The desert stretched endlessly before them, the sky ablaze with hues of gold and crimson. They stood hand in hand, the wind tugging gently at Elena's hair, and for a moment everything else faded. "I want this," Cale said softly, his gaze unwavering. "I want a life with you, here, there, wherever life takes us, but always together." Elena smiled, her heart full. "Always together," she echoed. The words felt like a vow, a promise that required no formal ceremony to carry weight. In the following days, they began to intertwine their lives fully. Elena helped organize community events at the library, often alongside Cale, who took pride in introducing her to the traditions and culture of his family. Together, they cared for the land, tended the trails, and shared quiet evenings watching the sunset paint the desert sky. Their love was not marked by grand gestures alone, but by the subtle, everyday choices that demonstrated devotion, patience, and mutual respect. Seasons changed, and with each passing day, their connection deepened. They celebrated small victories and weathered minor setbacks, always returning to the certainty they had declared on that pivotal evening in the desert storm. Their love was steady, resilient, and luminous, a union of hearts that had chosen each other, deliberately and wholeheartedly. In Arroyo Verde, the story of Elena and Cale became quietly legendary, not for drama or spectacle, but for the quiet power of two people who had discovered one another, faced challenges, and built a life rooted in trust and love. And as they stood together on the cliffs overlooking the mesas, hand in hand, they knew that the future, whatever it held, would always be faced side by side. Their journey had begun with curiosity and observation, blossomed through shared moments and emotional intimacy, and had been solidified in declarations and choices. In the end, their love was not fleeting or fragile. It was a promise fulfilled, a bond chosen forever, a life made extraordinary simply by being together.